Hey guys, in today's video I want to go over a really fun and interesting game I played against my friend and fellow top player Jackson Smiley at this past Scrabble Players Championship. This was Game 7 of the championships, the final game of Day 1. Going into this game, I was sitting at an undefeated 6-0 and Jackson was not too far behind, so we were both off to good starts, and this was a key game for us to keep our momentum going into Day 2. Jackson started out this game very well, drawing an opening rack of EEORSST, and he quickly finds and plays his only playable bingo of stereos for 66 points, taking care with his placement to not put any vowels next to the bonus squares and thus minimize my counterplay. I have a decent looking rack ACIOORS, but there are no playable bingos here, and I'm not going to be able to score all that many points. Not the start I wanted, but I made what I feel is a very nice play here, Korea for 16 points. The key idea with this play is that it sets up my S for Scoria, and because the C doesn't make any two other words, if Jackson doesn't have his own S, it's very difficult for him to play next to Korea and block. It's also worth mentioning that there's actually only one S left in the pool already, because Jackson used two of them on his opening bingo and I have a third. So the odds of Jackson having the last S, now or in the near future, are pretty slim, which means I'm probably going to be able to use this spot and it'll stay a nuisance for Jackson for a long time, and indeed that turned out to be the case. Jackson, thankfully for me, drew quite poorly after his opening bingo, pulling 3 A's, an O, and a U. He made a nice play here of aorta for 17 points, clearing out a bunch of the bad tiles on his rack, and also dealing with a strong scoring spot I created with Korea. If we go back, it's worth mentioning that besides the S hook I created for Scoria, I also created a pretty big scoring spot at the F6 square, the triple letter score next to is. There are a lot of high-scoring consonants, notably including the Q and the X, that can go in that spot and make potentially 50-plus point plays. So Jackson takes out that possibility by making this play. I think a very smart decision on his part. I do draw a high-scoring consonant, the Z, although that is not one of the tiles that would have gone in that spot. I do have a very high-scoring play available here, the 56-point Snoozy through the O of Korea. However, here, I make an interesting decision, sacrificing 16 points to instead play Woozy. Why did I do this? Normally, the S is not quite worth 16 points. I normally tell my students the S is worth about 10 on average, but I say on average because sometimes the S is worth more and sometimes the S is worth less. You never want to have absolute rules of thumb in Scrabble. And this is one of those situations where I felt the S was worth more, for a couple of reasons. The biggest one was because of the Scoria hook I created earlier. If I play Snoozy and lose the S, now I have all of a sudden much less ability to bingo in the near future. After Woozy, I preserve that Scoria hook, which, like I mentioned earlier, is so annoying, if not potentially impossible for Jackson to block. The other reason is because, as I mentioned earlier, there's only one S remaining. If there were still 3 S's left, or something like that, I might be more willing to part ways with my S with Snoozy, because I'd figure I'm likely to draw another S sooner or later. However, with only one S left, there's no guarantee I'm going to draw the other S anytime soon if I play Snoozy, or for that matter, ever. So because of that, I felt it was extra important for me to keep my S even at the expense of 16 points, and Woozy does feel like a reasonable decision. Jackson draws the Q, which in this case is not a bad thing because he kept a U with his previous play of aorta. He nicely gets rid of it with Quango for 32 points. Another nice thing about Quango is it prepares to potentially block the Scoria hook. Again, the Scoria hook is very difficult to block immediately because Jackson can't overlap the C, but Jackson now has the ability to play vertically through the Q or maybe the U and obstruct at least partially the Scoria hook, so a very nice idea here by Jackson. I have a nice draw, D-E-I-N-O-S-T, but there are no 7-letter words I can play with Scoria. My only playable bingos are low-scoring 8-letter words through the A Jackson just opened with Quango. I can bingo with Sedation for 61 points, but I wasn't too thrilled about putting an S between two triple word scores, so I sacrificed a point and instead played a Stonade for 60. This brings me into the lead by a single point, 116 to 115. Jackson has a decent looking rack here, but no playable bingos or particularly high scoring plays, so he plays Dag for 21 points, taking out a potentially lucrative scoring spot I just opened next to the O and I of a Stonade and keeping a nice leave in AELT. I draw pretty well, and I find a very nice play here. My only playable bingo, the rather bizarre-looking Ependima through the Y of Ruzi for 66 points, and that brings me now into the lead by 46. However, not to be outdone, Jackson, pulling the S and the H out of the bag, bingos right back, hooking my word, with Heliast and Ependimas for 87, easily his highest scoring play, and he is now all of a sudden back in the lead by nearly 40 points. I have a decent looking rack here, but the pesky G, as it so often does, it gets in the way once again. It really doesn't go well with any of my other tiles, and it prevents me from bingoing, so all I can really do here is leave the G on my rack, use my other strong tiles, and score 38 points with triple, quite fittingly hitting the triple word score. Again, not too thrilled about keeping the G, but I've got to score, I've got to take out that spot. And the other key thing I was aware of here, guys, is we are more than halfway through the game and both blanks are still out. So I want to be playing a lot of tiles here to give myself the best chance possible at nabbing one of those two valuable blanks that are probably going to be key to the outcome of this game. At this point, it's still very close. Jackson is up 3 points and on turn. He has a bit of a clunky draw after his bingo, but he makes a nice play here of FUB, scoring well, obstructing the top right part of the board a little bit, and keeping a leave in BDHO that's a little bit clunky but does still have some good scoring potential. I draw pretty poorly after my play of triple, pulling just one Val and the clunky V. Thankfully, I do have a nice play that Jackson inadvertently just opened up for me, extending B to B9 to the triple for 30. I'm not thrilled about the LRV leave, and I'm also not thrilled about opening tiles for Jackson to play through with those two blanks remaining, but I don't have a choice here. I'm down 40, so I can't live in fear. I can't be afraid of opening the board, and I've got to hope for some vowels and some good stuff to go with my LRV. We'll see if I get it. Thankfully for me, Jackson, although he has a pretty balanced rack, does not have any playable bingos. And he makes another nice play here, Hemoid, for 39 points. He does have plays that are a little bit safer. Hemoid is a bit of a risk, opening a triple-triple line with two blanks out, but something like Meth is not as appealing because, again, turning over tiles is so important with those two blanks unseen, and Jackson plays 6 tiles with Hemoid instead of just 3 with a play like Meth, so he's going to have twice, or approximately twice the chance of drawing a blank. While it is certainly a risk to open the H between two triple word scores, an H in the 5th spot of the word isn't the most dangerous opening he could create, and he also needs to realize his lead is not that secure here. He can't afford to play scared, or I could easily come back with a high-scoring play or a normal bingo that's not a triple-triple. So I like the aggression here on Jackson's part with a small lead with 2 blanks still in the bag. Unfortunately for me, I did not draw either of the blanks, and holding a very ugly-looking rack of IJLNRUV, I make a play that appears to be pretty forced here, Jun, for 33 points. I could play Unveil for 22, which I actually didn't consider, but I don't think it's a good idea. It does block, but remember guys, I'm down. I can't really afford to be blocking. And keeping the J is also going to significantly impede any bingo chances I might have, and I was starting to feel more and more with each passing turn, as Jackson kept scoring and getting closer to those blanks, that I was going to need a bingo to get back into this game. So I think Jun makes a lot more sense. Again, not thrilled about the ILRV leave, but especially with 4E still out, I felt I had a chance to at least turn this into something. Jackson, luckily for me, still manages to dodge the blanks. Although, fortunately for him, he does have several reasonable options to consider, all of which score in the ballpark of 40 points. His highest scoring play appears to be Wreck through the E of Hemoid for 44, which looks like a nice play. However, it has a significant drawback, opening a lucrative line for me to bingo on the top row on the triple word score, hooking EW, and with 2 blanks left, I think Jackson smartly eschewed this option. Instead, he goes with Huck for 39 points, which looks pretty solid. The biggest downside to this play, as Jackson noted, is that it only plays 3 tiles, and with each passing turn that the blanks are not drawn, turnover becomes more and more valuable, because now, with only 21 tiles unseen to Jackson, 2 of them being blanks, every tile he turns over is going to significantly increase his chances of drawing one of the valuable blanks. Because of that, he also strongly considered playing Bucker for 40 points on the bottom left, which is a bit scarier leaving that H open, but it does turn over 2 more tiles for those blanks, which, like I said, is a pretty significant difference. Overall, I think Huck makes a lot of sense. Jackson's still in a good position here. He's going up about 50 points with this play. He might even be able to outrun some bingos I might end up drawing. So I think playing a little more cautiously here at the expense of a little turnover does make some sense for Jackson. With this play, he goes up by 55 points, and unfortunately for me, I once again miss the blanks. And here I have another interesting decision. I pretty quickly zone in on playing through the M of Hemoid with either Filmy or Firmly. Both of these plays are nice since they do 2 things. They play a good number of tiles going for those blanks, they score well, and they also create another significant threat, which, being that I was down more and more with each passing turn, I felt I would need. Namely, if I draw the X, I am now threatening to play Vex above the F and I of Firmly, making F and Jai for about 60 points. So Jackson's now going to have to worry about that, as well as possible bingos on the right-hand side of the board. as well as potential bingos hooking Scoria, which I might add has still stayed open even though I opened it all the way back on turn 1. And that creates the exact dynamic I felt I needed, given that Jackson is holding a lead. The question really became, should I play Firmly or should I play Filmy? Normally, Firmly seems a lot more logical, it gets 2 more points, and it gets another shot at those super valuable blanks, as well as the X, which is now really important for me to get to try to hit a 60-point Vex, which could easily get me back into the game. However, the other thing I noticed, and something that might lean in favor of keeping the R with Filmy, is the unseen pool is fairly vowel heavy. If you guys look on the right, you'll notice that there are 9 vowels left compared to 7 consonants, so a significant disparity in favor of vowels. As such, keeping the R is going to help me retain a balanced rack and likely increase my bingo chances on my next turn. That being said, I decided, despite the pool, it was so important here, this late in the game, with so many good tiles left, both blanks and the X, that I needed so desperately to draw, it was better to play off the R with Firmly. And it's a debatable turn. Computer simulation does seem to narrowly prefer Filmy, but I think my logic here to play Firmly is sound, and we'll see how it worked out. Jackson did draw one of the blanks, but not much else good to go with it. He's now holding BELRVW blank. And with so many consonants, the pool is even more extremely vowel heavy from Jackson's perspective. You'll see he's looking at a pool now of 9 vowels and just 3 consonants as well as 1 blank. So something he's definitely going to need to take into account. Jackson's in a good position here, but not a great one, as while he is holding a lead, there are several ways he could quickly lose that lead. One of them is the X spot I just opened, and another one is me bingoing either on the right-hand side of the board or with Scoria. From his perspective, I'm a bit more likely to bingo on the right-hand side of the board, specifically through the N of benign, just because the unseen pool is so vowel heavy, and the N, a really flexible consonant, will be a huge boon to potential bingos for me. However, the problem is it's really difficult for Jackson to effectively block that N. He could do something like Drew from the D, but the problem is he's only scoring 16 and he's keeping the very awkward BLV blank. So he might often lose if I hit an Xbomb and take a lead in the endgame and have a more flexible rack, and I think Jackson correctly passed up on this idea. Jackson mainly considered 2 plays which couldn't be more different. The 23-point B on row 2 with the main idea of blocking the Xbomb, which does keep the questionable looking leaf of LRVW blank, and the 38-point Wolver down the B column, completely ignoring all of my threats while burning the blank, but scoring well, and leaving Jackson in good position to outrun some potential big plays I might hit. Wolver puts Jackson up by 57 points, about the value of any potential X-bomb I might hit on row 2. And that's probably going to leave Jackson a winning endgame in almost all situations, because he'll be up a tempo, holding a full rack of 7 tiles, and assuming he's able to score pretty well, which he likely will, given he's holding his B and is inevitably going to draw several vowels from a super vowel-heavy pool, he is definitely the heavy favorite. Is it possible he could lose in the endgame after Wolver and an X-bomb? Probably, but it's extremely unlikely. And the nice thing also about this play is if I manage to bingo somewhere else on the board, Jackson actually has a very nice shot at picking up the X himself, which he can use for his own X-bomb to outrun bingos. So Wolver kind of plays into Jackson's hands really well, since X-bombs for me are probably not enough, but X-bombs for Jackson, if he can draw the X, would likely be enough to outrun the vast majority, if not all, of my bingos. Does that mean Wolver is foolproof, though? Absolutely not. There are certainly cases where Jackson could lose. One such case, probably the most likely, is if I bingo immediately after Wolver and then happen to draw the X myself as my 1 tile out of the bag, because then I'll be threatening a high-scoring outplay and Jackson won't have the ability to score that much in response, and I should win in the endgame. The other possibility, where Jackson could lose after Wolver, is if I actually bingo with the X with a word like geotaxis from the G in B9 or ataxis hooking Scoria. So Wolver leaves Jackson very likely to win, but it's certainly not a guarantee. B, for 23, is a very different play, blocking the X-bomb and more or less forcing me to bingo, or so it would seem, if I want any chance to win. B is certainly much less of a forcing play, and it makes the game a bit more complicated, as it's a lot harder to see how it's going to play out based on different plays I could make. It leaves 4 tiles in the bag, which is a significant difference from the 1 in the bag that Wolver leaves, as it allows me a lot of flexibility to not empty the bag with my next play. If I don't empty the bag, which I'm often not going to, if I don't have a good play, then that could leave Jackson in another super complicated position on his next turn, especially holding a clunky rack like LRVW blank. Of course, the clear benefit of B is that it blocks the Xbomb, so that means even if I do bingo right now, then Jackson might be able to win a lot of the endgames even when I draw the X, because I'm not going to have such a big threat as I would have if I were to bingo and then draw the X after Wolver. Jackson ultimately decided to go with B, which I think is reasonable. Personally, I actually think I would have gone with Wolver. Like I said before, I think leaving the X-Bomb open is actually in Jackson's best interest here, because if I use it, he should be able to win in the endgame, and if I don't have the X already, that means he's got a 5 in 6 chance to draw it, since he's drawing 5 out of the 6 remaining tiles in the bag, and it's a super useful tool for him to be able to outrun any bingo I might have. Again, does it win all the time? Absolutely not. Personally, I think it's a little bit better than B, and will lead to much more straightforward play. As we'll see, B is not the last very difficult decision that Jackson ends up facing this game. I did pull one of the blanks I was going for with Firmly, but a bunch of vowels as expected, 3 E's, an O, a V, the X, and the blank. So, of course, I wasn't shocked to see my intended play of Vex above Firmly for close to 60 points blocked, and I had an interesting decision here. The main two plays I was debating between were both in the bottom left part of the board, X for 31 points, leaving 2 in the bag, and Vexer for 30 points, emptying the bag, but getting rid of my troublesome V as well as 2 of my E's. The leave of Vexer, of course, looks a lot better, but emptying the bag is a pretty big problem here, since I'm almost certainly going to now need to draw bingo threats in 2 spots to win, as Jackson is going to know exactly what I have. It's certainly possible for me to draw bingo threats in 2 spots. After all, I have the right-hand side of the board, and I also have the line with Scoria that continues to be open. Maybe if I draw the right stuff, I could even threaten a bingo ending in an O, making OB on the top row that Jackson just opened. That, it's worth mentioning, is another potential drawback of B. Jackson didn't keep an O, and as hard as it is to end a 7 in an O, that could be something annoying he might have to deal with if I have the right tiles. That being said, I didn't feel my chances of drawing bingos in 2 spots were all that good after Vexer, and being that I would be down 12 points and a tempo, and Jackson likely having a reasonable enough rack to go out in 2, I felt it was going to be next to impossible for me to ever win in an endgame after emptying the bag with Vexer without bingoing, so because of all that, I went with X. I think this is the better play, and at the minimum, it makes Jackson's life a lot more difficult on his next turn, because now instead of an empty bag where he knows exactly what I have, he's going to be dealing with a bag with 2 tiles, which is one of the most notoriously difficult situations you can be in Scrabble. The thing that makes a 2 in the bag pre-endgame so hard is you still have 9 choose 2 or 36 possibilities to permute, which is way more than most humans can do, especially when you're dealing with a position that might lead to endgames as complicated as this one. And you're also usually forcing your opponent to empty the bag when you leave 2, because if they don't empty the bag, they can only play 1 tile, and that's going to significantly impact their ability to score. So 2 in the bag is, I think, generally the sweet spot. It's one of the best numbers in the bag in a lot of cases to leave for your opponent. And yes, EEOV is not great, but I did see several possibilities. I can hit a lot of words through the N, like renovate or novelize. I can also hit something like relievo on top, making OV, which is surprisingly likely. If I draw any of IL, IR, LR, or any of those 3 tiles with the other blank, I will be threatening relievo on top, which is very, very unlikely to get blocked and would often win me the game. So I think X was a sharp decision on my part, definitely happy with this. And Jackson now faces a brutal position with 2 in the bag, holding ALORVW blank with an 11-point lead and facing an unseen tile pool that's vowel heavy, but certainly not without danger, blank AEEIIOTV. The thing is, now that the score has crept a little bit closer, I'm only down 11, Jackson is not necessarily guaranteed to win whenever I don't bingo. So he can't just go all out blocking my bingo threats and assuming that he's going to win in the endgame. That being said, all of my possible bingo threats are on the right-hand side of the board. There are no possible 7s now ending in an S with Scoria, and no possible 7s ending in an O for Obi, and Jackson did correctly determine that on his turn. So it does still make a lot of sense for Jackson to make some effort to block the bottom right. And he attempted to do that by playing Growl for 11 points, which looks very reasonable. Keeping AV blank, he's going to have a lot of flexibility in the endgame, and if he draws the right tiles, will often be threatening an outplay, perhaps with Scoria. The issue with Growl is that it turns out he is often losing in the endgame with a decent number of draws. A better play, as the Macondo engine points out, would have been draw for 16 points from the D in Ependymas. Why is this better? After all, it keeps 4 tiles on his rack, and with 6 tiles instead of 5, you would think it's going to be even harder for Jackson to play out on his next turn, which might be key to winning a lot of endgames. It might seem that way, but in this case, because Jackson sets up the L hook for draw, he's actually going out a lot more often. If he draws the right 2-tile combination, he is going to be threatening a heavy-hitting 6-tile outplay to the triple from draw, which I'm absolutely going to have to block if I want any chance to win, and it's often going to be very difficult for me to do so while scoring anything. For instance, if he draws an E and an I, he's going to be threatening Lovier, and if he draws an A and a T, he's going to be threatening Lovats, among several other possibilities. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but maybe I can hook an L or an S there for draws and get a huge score myself. And in fact, I often can. The possibility of Soviet with a blank S, which would score a whopping 44 points, is certainly a concern, or it would at least seem to be a concern from Jackson's perspective. However, here's the amazing thing. Jackson never has to worry about Soviet because he's guaranteed to have an outplay in reserve with Scoria. Why? Well, if I have Soviet, the remaining tiles in the pool are an A, an E, and an I, so that would mean by definition Jackson's 2-tile draw is going to be a 2-tile combination of A, E, and I. Well, let's go through all of them. If he draws an A and an E, he goes out with loaves and Scoria. If he draws an A and an I, he goes out with violas and Scoria. And finally, if he draws an E and an I, he goes out with olives and Scoria. And I'll leave you guys to check the math that these outplays do score enough to outrun Soviet pretty comfortably. So the combination of threatening plays down from draw as well as a lot of outplays with Scoria is often going to be decisive for Jackson. The other nice thing about draw over his play of Growl is if we look back at Growl, it might allow me some relatively high scoring and rack cleaning plays down to the bottom right triple that'll leave me an outplay and can prove decisive in some endgames. Obviously, this is super hard to compute over the board, and Jackson was also getting under some time pressure. But if we look at the numbers from Macondo, neither play is a 100% win, but draw is quite a bit better. Draw wins 33 out of 36 times for Jackson, whereas his actual play of Growl wins 30 out of 36 times. So, is it a huge hit to his win percentage? No, but a 3 out of 36 hit, or approximately 8%, is certainly substantial, and it very well could have made the difference depending on what he drew. That being said, once again, this is a brutal position to compute, and a big reason why I made my play of X instead of emptying the bag with Vexor. I knew that it was going to force Jackson into a super challenging 2-in-the-bag pre-endgame, and that's exactly what I wanted. It's worth mentioning that when I plugged this into Macondo, Macondo took nearly a full 24 hours to solve this position and conclude that draw was definitively a better play. Why did it take so long? That's, again, guys, the beauty of 2-in-the-bag pre-endgames. They are so dang complicated, and they are especially complicated when there are 2 blanks still involved. Not only does Jackson have a blank, there's an unseen blank in the tile pool and very likely on my rack. So that just further increases the number of possible plays that Macondo has to consider for Jackson and the number of possible plays it has to consider for me. So a brutal position here. Jackson technically looks like he didn't quite get it right, but I think he had the right idea, and it's super difficult to execute properly. In any case, Jackson played Growl, and I was sitting on EEIIOV blank, so I had drawn 2 I's after X, definitely not what I was hoping for, and with Jackson holding AATV blank, my play here was pretty obvious. Jackson is threatening to go out with Avast and Scoria, and I absolutely have to block that. So I pretty quickly play Video for 26 points with Obi, saving EI, which is going to go out for me on my next turn, but as I saw, it looked like it was going to fall just a little bit short. Jackson responded with Tovs, making Etta for 21 points. It's not quite optimal for him. Very slightly better it would have been to play Waves or Waved, hooking triple, but this was still good enough as I responded with my best outplay of Vise for 12 points. He did give me a slightly higher scoring outplay here. That's part of why it would have been better for him to play Waves or Waved. This was not quite enough, as that brought me to 388, finishing at 390 after getting 2 more points from Jackson's unplayed A. So the final score was 393 Jackson to 390 for me. A thrilling 3-point win and a super, super interesting second half of the game, especially with both of those blanks unseen until the bitter end. I might add also overall a very well-played game on both of our parts, despite both of us having some super difficult decisions. Or was it a well-played game?
Several days later.
In fact, more than a week after the championships concluded, I get this completely out of context message from Jackson. Dude! With 5 U's. Video was a winning play. Wait, what? I thought we just said I did my best here and I lost by 3. How was Video back here a winning play? After all, like we said, Jackson just needs to do something like this, and he outruns my outplay of Vise, right? Wrong. Vise, guys, is not my best outplay. I have an absolutely stunning outplay here that scores more than the 12 points of Vise and is enough to win. It is the absolutely insane fit of Inaner through Nan and the R for 18 points. Had I played this, that would have brought me to 394, and after I get 2 points for Jackson's unplayed A, I actually would have won by 3 here, not Jackson, 396 to 393. Crazy. And in case you're wondering, well, okay, could Jackson have blocked Inaner? The answer is no. If we go back a couple turns here to where Jackson played Tavs, there's really no way for Jackson to block Inaner. He can block it, but he's going to score almost nothing, and there are other spots for me to go out with an E and an I, and I'll leave it to you guys to check that there's no way Jackson can productively block that's going to win him the game. So I am completely winning here after video, and I was blissfully unaware. And the amazing thing, guys, is that after this game ended, it was such an interesting game. We had a lot of top experts, including the two of us, Josh Sokol, Ori Swift, and a couple of others look at this board, and none of them, not one, noticed Inaner. We all assumed that after Tavs, Jackson was winning. I did my best going out with Vise and losing by 3. And I had no idea whatsoever that I blew this game until over a week after the tournament ended, which is kind of crazy. And I was certainly in a state of shock after Jackson sent me that note. Although the crazy thing is, once he told me that I missed a better outplay, I found it in about 5 seconds. Sometimes that's just the fallacy of knowing that there's something there to look for. Your brain more quickly finds it, versus when you don't necessarily know to look for something like that, it's easier to miss it. This also brings up another very interesting point just about overall mental game and tournament management. I never ever put my games through Quackle or Macondo or any sort of engine during a multi-day tournament, especially one as high stakes as Nationals. The reason is because, let's say I had discovered this mistake during the tournament. I'm generally pretty good about processing these kind of things, but it definitely could have put me on tilt, or at least made me a bit frustrated with myself and impacted my future play. Not knowing about this mistake, I didn't really have a whole lot of regrets about losing this game to Jackson by 3 points, and it left me in a much better mental state going forward. So that's why I always tell my students when they're playing a tournament, and I'll tell all of you guys as well on YouTube if you're ever playing a Scrabble tournament, definitely do not analyze your games until the tournament is over, because there's no upside to it. If you realize you're playing well, then it's kind of reassuring, but it doesn't really change anything you're already feeling without analysis. But there's a ton of downside. If you realize you've been making mistakes, you can easily get upset or deflated, and if you don't manage that well, and it's really hard to manage, then you could easily end up impacting your play and your ability to move on from mistakes later on in the tournament, and that could certainly have a negative impact on your overall performance. And I don't want that to happen to any of you guys. So definitely a PSA here. I highly, highly recommend not analyzing your games during a Scrabble tournament until the tournament is over. And now I will close on that note. Thanks so much to you guys for watching this video. Hope you found it entertaining and instructive. Shout out as well to Jackson for another entertaining game here. I feel like we've had many of those. Always a pleasure to play against him. And yeah, that's it for this one, guys. Thanks again for your support. I will see you all soon for the next video. Bye-bye.